Aggregate supply is the total amount that producers in an economy are willing and able to supply at a given price level and in a given time period. And we can plot this onto a diagram with price level on the y-axis and real GDP or output on the x. Now the short run aggregate supply curve will be upward sloping. That's based on the assumption that firms aim to maximise their profits. And in the short run, the cost of producing additional units of output increases at higher levels of output, so firms require price increases to incentivise them to produce more. So as price level goes up, we expand upwards along the short run aggregate supply curve. Now, classical economists work on the assumption that the economy should work at its productive potential in the long run. And so the long run aggregate supply curve, under this model at least, is vertical. And there's a parallel here with the production possibility frontier. If the economy is producing on the limit of its PPF, there's no spare capacity in the economy, and the level of output at which the vertical long run aggregate supply curve will sit will be equivalent to this limit of the production possibility frontier. The short run aggregate supply curve is drawn based on determinants of aggregate supply other than price being constant. The other determinants will essentially be based around costs of production, whether that's labour costs, raw material cost, or costs caused by changes to government policy. So any changes in these costs of production will cause the short run aggregate supply curve to shift. So if we were to have an increase in labour costs, that would shift the short run aggregate supply curve to the left. A fall in the cost of raw materials would shift short run aggregate supply to the right. Government policies like increased taxation would increase costs and so shift short run aggregate supply to the left, while more subsidies would help to bring costs down and would shift short run aggregate supply to the right. As the vertical long run aggregate supply curve represents the limit of the productive capacity of the economy, in order for this to shift, it will need a change in the quality or quantity of the factors of production. And you'd hope that over time, long run aggregate supply would shift outwards to the right, as technology, skills and the education of the labour force, and investment in capital tend to grow over time. And for a number of years, population growth will have increased the size of the labour force, causing long run aggregate supply to shift right as well. But in more recent times, with ageing populations and people retiring, a shrinking labour force could cause the curve to shift left. Now, for the same reason, inward migration would increase the size of the labour force and shift the curve to the right, but outward migration would have the opposite effect and shift the curve left.